Okay, I'm going to try to keep this one quick. I've had a couple questions from students about how to appropriately quote from a text in their analytical essays. I don't want to take for granted that you know all of it, so I'm just going to go through it here. First, I want to talk to you about what you have to cite in your essay. Essentially, any words, ideas, or phrases that are not your own. In particular, if you're directly quoting from the text, you need to cite that appropriately. I've given you an example here, imagining that I'm writing an analytical essay about the giver. You can see that the text in black is my own writing, my own ideas in my paragraph, but the text in green is a direct quote from the text. Look at the quotation marks, the punctuation surrounding that quote. First thing I want to point out to you is that I lead into the quote naturally and explain why it's significant. Individual differences are discouraged in a dystopian society where uniformity is prized. We learn that Jonas is different from other citizens in his society in several ways, namely the color of his eyes, sorry for the typo there, but, quote, no one mentioned such things. It was not a rule, but was considered rude to call attention to things that were unsettling or different about an individual. First thing I just want to point out here is obviously you have quotation marks around the quote, but you remove the period that would normally go at the end of this sentence and you move it to the outside of the citation. You just put the page number inside the parentheses and you move that period out to the very end. That's how it should look. Next, I want to talk to you about the MLA format, the Modern Language Association. This is a generally accepted format for how you do a citation. First thing you need to know is that the author's last name and the page numbers from which the quotation or paraphrase is taken have to appear. You've got to mention the author's last name and the page number. But in this essay, you're going to identify the title and the author in your introductory paragraph. Therefore, when you're citing a quote in your paragraphs, you really only need a page number in parentheses because you've already identified the text it is coming from. If you use an outside source other than your novel that you've identified in the lead paragraph, then you need to also put that name of that author from the outside source and the page number inside those parentheses. Okay, this is just another example of what the MLA format is going to look like. I'll just let you read it. In this case, I moved the page number. What I want you to notice here is that I save the page number citation for the end of the thought. You can see that I've got a quote kind of in the middle of two of my own thoughts. So I start out by setting up the quote. I include the supporting evidence, and then I continue to discuss the supporting evidence. And it's okay if you want to save the page number until after you've given this second explanation of the supporting evidence or you've said something about the quote. The only thing you need to remember is that the page number for this quote needs to be given before you give another quote unless they were both on the same page. Okay, this is the part that I've had some questions about. How do you quote dialogue? What does it look like if you've got quotation marks actually in the book and they're now inside your quotation marks? So I did an example here for you. The black again is my own writing in my own essay and the green is the quotation mark. So what you should notice is that it looks like there's a triple quotation mark here and a triple quotation mark here. Everything that's in green, including the single quotation marks, appeared in the text of the novel. But in the text of the novel, these single quotation marks were actually double quotation marks to show dialogue. But when I'm quoting it in my essay, it would be really confusing if I had double quotation marks around my excerpt that I'm referencing or quoting in my essay and double quotation marks for dialogue. So the change that you make is you make those dialogue marks from the novel single quotation marks, which results in looking like a triple quotation mark. But I've tried to color code it so that you can see that the black double quotation mark are my marks communicating to my reader that I have lifted this excerpt from the novel and I'm using it as evidence. The single quotation marks that are green tell you that the word please and take some of the pain are dialogue from the novel. Last thing I want to say about quoting, please, please don't quote and run. And that's an expression that I made up because sometimes the way students include a quotation in their essay feels like a hit and run. It feels like you have smacked me in the face with a quote and then you've just run away. You don't follow up with an explanation or lead into it naturally. You don't weave that quote. So I want you to be thinking about that. Make the quote a part of your own sentence. Your sentence should read smoothly from the start to the finish. The quote should not seem to be dropped from the sky, and your reader should not feel like they're part of a hit and run. You shouldn't expect your reader to figure out why you're using this quote. You have to make it smooth. So the last slide in this presentation is just a do and a don't. A good example of smoothly weaving in a quote, and a bad example of dropping it in without any discussion about it or explanation. Look at the first one. As Jonas separates from the community, he is able to feel emotions more completely. During his escape, Jonas wept because he was afraid now that he could not save Gabriel. His love for Gabriel is clear when we learn that he no longer cared about himself. Do you see how smoothly it sounds when I read that? It almost feels like I wrote the whole thing because I created my own writing around it so that it was natural. Look at the next one and how choppy it is. As Jonas separates from the community, he is able to feel emotions more deeply. He wept because he was afraid now that he could not save Gabriel. Jonas loves Gabriel. He no longer cared about himself. Do you see how in that second example, there's a lot left to the reader to figure out? Whereas in the first example, I have clearly explained all of the ideas that I'm trying to communicate. Hope this helps you understand how to quote from a text in your analytical essay.